Alright, welcome back to WrestleRant here today, folks, with my review of Judgment Day in Your House 1998, right here on WrestleRant. So moving forward for the remainder of the month of May, for the most part, I'll be talking all about Judgment Day, every installment with the exception of I think it was 2002 that I reviewed last year here on the WrestleRant video series. You're going to have to go back and check that one out, cheap plug. But 1998, 2000, 2001, 03, 04, 05, 06, 07, 08, and 09. So a lot of good pay-per-views. I always enjoyed Judgment Day. I thought it was a good show. So kicking it off with Judgment Day 1998. Not a lot to say about this show in particular because, as opposed to the most recent Extreme Rules reviews that I've done that went on for 30, 40 minutes that I rambled on for. I was more familiar with those shows. I've seen them enough times. I was a fan at that time, so I could talk about the build-up and the aftermath. With this show, not so much. I only know the context of what we saw on this show, but they did do a solid job of kind of giving a background of most of the matches on the show, kind of giving me a feel of the story they were trying to tell. So I still enjoyed a majority of the matches, so I thought it made for a good show on the whole. But kicking off the show, though, Al Snow versus Mark Mero. I've talked about both guys here on the show before. Al Snow was a guilty pleasure of everybody. Not the world's greatest wrestler, but the gimmick was over as all hell. What does everybody want? Head. What does everyone want? What does everybody need? A head. That whole gimmick was great. As stupid as it was, as silly as it was over. There's no denying that. And he had good matches with whoever he worked with. Like I said, not the world's greatest worker, but the gimmick itself was so over to the point that people, wanted to see him in action. And Mark Mero by this point was already far away separated from Sable. At this point, he was associated with the women's champion, Jacqueline. So a nice outing for the most part, really not much more to say about it than that. There really wasn't much more of a story told other than just kind of a standard opener. It was a good match. I enjoyed the, entertaining mannerisms. It was kind of more entertaining than it was like a well-wrestled matchup because, Al Snow always had the crowd in the palm of his hands. Mark Mero was a great heel. An incredible athlete, too. I know a lot of people more so talk about Sable and their whole thing. And Mark Mero, himself was a very good athlete that never really kind of went anywhere in WWE because he was always overshadowed with Sable and now Jacqueline on this show. But still, a good way to kick off the show. Up next, six-man tag team action with Hawk Animal, otherwise collectively known as LOD 2000, Legion of Doom 2000, tag teaming with Droz to take on the pairing or the trio of Paul Ellering and the Disciples of Apocalypse. So I wasn't really all that familiar with the Disciples of Apocalypse. Oddly enough, going into the show, I've only heard very little about them, which is weird because, like I said, they were around in the Attitude Era from 97 to 98. And I probably should know more about them than I do, but I don't really, not really that much. I don't really know that much about them. But it was a solid six-man tag team match. They were trying to tell the story that LOD wasn't really on the same page with Droz, and he was kind of like an honorary member. He really stuck out to me as being like the odd man out. I've always been a huge Legion of Doom fan, watching their matches back from the 80s and early 90s and in WCW, WWE, whatever, on the territories. Still, I always enjoyed their work, especially this is also the same year. I enjoyed their stuff at WrestleMania 15 and 14, the Chicago Street Fight. I thought that stuff was awesome. But, it was very clear that when they tried to rejuvenate LOD and kind of make them a newer version of their old selves, it wasn't as great as it used to be. They were still over. They just kind of had an altered theme song. It wasn't the same Legion of Doom that everyone once knew. They were still good, but the inclusion of Droz was weird, and I imagine based off the kind of teased tension between the two teams, between the two parties in this match of Hawk and Animal and then Droz, they probably, parted ways with him shortly thereafterwards. But it was a good match, and they more so focused on that teasing tension between LOD and Droz, so it was successful in that respect. Up next, our first championship matchup of the night: Christian taking on the cruiserweight champ, or the light heavyweight, the light heavyweight championship. The two pretty much they're the exact same championships, but WWE's lineage is different. One's, I don't know if it acknowledges the WCW lineage for the cruiserweight title, but the light heavyweight title was the answer to their cruiserweight title, and of course, considering how popular the cruiserweight division was over in WCW at that time. So Christian contending for the gold against Taka Michinoku, and a really good matchup. We had Gangrel in the corner of Christian, and Edge was kind of in the crowd, kind of cheering his brother on, kind of serving as assistants, kind of aiding assistants to him. And then there was somebody in the corner of Taka Michinoku whose name I couldn't pronounce for the life of me. I can't remember what his name was, but he had somebody in his corner. And I don't remember the exact time when Taka Michinoku turned heel, because I remember the last time I saw him he was a babyface. at WrestleMania 14, I want to say. So I don't know at what point he turned heel. But they did mention on commentary, which kind of added to the moment of Christian winning, that he had been holding that championship, the light heavyweight title, for 10 months, which is a hell of a long time. I'm sure there weren't really many contenders for challenging him for the gold, but it's still a pretty impressive stat. To be holding any piece of gold for 10 months straight is very impressive, and it made the moment that much more memorable when Christian ultimately defeated him to win the championship. I believe Christian's first taste of gold in WWE. Correct me if I'm wrong, he might have been a hardcore champion before that, I'm not exactly sure. But it was a cool moment there, a really nice match, and our first truly really good match of the night, so I enjoyed that. Taka Michinoku looked good in defeat. Christian picking up the win, a monumental moment, not monumental, but it was a memorable moment, on this show. Up next, we had Goldust versus Delvina. So the whole story behind this match, which I really liked, one of my more favorite stories of the night that was being told, was that Val Venus was making out with Marlena, who of course was formerly with Goldust many years before this in 95, 96. And then in that time, I have no idea at what point Goldust went to being himself, Dustin Runnels, or Dustin Rhodes, or whatever he called himself. And he was saying, he was holding up signs, and they did the whole video package to recap this feud, so it really kind of helped me get engaged in this match more than they probably would have had they not done that. He was holding up signs saying he's coming back, blah, 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 blah. And then one night on Raw, the Goldust theme music went off and people went nuts. And he was saying that I told you he was going to be back, and he comes out and he takes out Val Venus, leading to the match on this show. So Goldust was trying to seek vengeance on Val Venus for stealing his woman, his girl, Marlena. So it wasn't like the most well-wrestled matchup, but it told a really good story. Goldust was out for revenge, and Marlena kind of played a factor in the finish. She was on the apron, and Goldust almost hit her off, and then actually Val Venus almost did, and they almost came face-to-face. And while the referee was distracted with Marlena at ringside, Goldust hit a low blow for the 1-2-3 to pick up the victory. So an entertaining matchup, not a great match, but it was enjoyable, very entertaining. And they told a solid story, so I thought that was pretty good. And one of the few stories on this show that I could find myself really kind of getting invested in, despite not being a fan at that period in time. So our second championship match of the night was for the European Championship. D'Lo Brown defending against X-Pac. So again, a nice, didn't really tell much of a story. I mean, this is kind of the opposite of the prior bout. Didn't really tell much of a story, but I really did enjoy it. D'Lo Brown and X-Pac, in my opinion, two of the more underrated workers in the last 10-15 years. Definitely of the Attitude Era. X-Pac I always thought was really, really good. I mean, he kind of gets overshadowed in the Clique, considering who else was in it. Triple H and Shawn Michaels, Scott Hall, Kevin Nash. The only guy of that bunch to never win a world title. And then D'Lo Brown I always enjoyed. The head bombing, him a part of being a part of the Nation of Domination. I always thought he was a great athlete. So I enjoyed this matchup for the European title. X-Pac would emerge victorious to become the European champion. So a really nice, memorable moment there. So I enjoyed that. I thought that was good. So X-Pac, your new European champion. Well-wrestled matchup with a nice moment to cap it off. Up next for the World Tag Team titles, the Headbangers taking on the New Age Outlaws. The New Age Outlaws were the defending champions on this show. It was a good match. Of all the matches on the show, and it's weird because I just watched the show yesterday on the network. Of all the matches on this show, I don't really remember that much about this one in particular. From what I can recall, it was a good match, but aside from that, the Headbangers were a fun tag team. I just have not seen enough of their work to truly be a fan or to truly here come the Headbangers, here comes a great match, Always love the New Age Outlaws. The Headbangers I can never really get fully invested in for some reason. But yeah, it was a good match, nothing special. Like if it was terrible, I could recall that off the top of my head, but really nothing special. The New Age Outlaws got disqualified, thus retaining their championships. And they made a nice note later on in the night how the champions were not, going into the IC title match up next. They made a cool note how all the champions on the show were losers. The European title and the light heavyweight titles both changed hands before this bout. And although they retained the championships, the World Tag Team titles, the New Age Outlaws, they did lose. They lost by disqualification. So it was a pretty standard tag team match, I'm sure leading to something else down the line of the next pay-per-view, whatever. Fine match, nothing really to note there. Up next, the Intercontinental Championship, Ken Shamrock defending against Mankind. Again, more of an entertaining matchup than it was a great match. Something fresh, because in all the Attitude Era pay-per-views and Raws that I've watched in my time, I haven't seen these two work much together. So it was kind of cool to see Ken Shamrock and Mankind work a match against one another. It was pretty good for the most part. I've always been a huge fan of both guys, Mankind and Ken Shamrock. Ken Shamrock is more of a, like I said with X-Pac and D'Lo Brown, but to a higher extent, a very underrated worker. Not even underrated worker, but one of the more underrated faces of the Attitude Era. I wouldn't even call him a face of the Attitude Era, but his in-ring work and based off his character and his popularity and the accolades that he had, a former tag team Intercontinental Champion and King of the Ring winner. So he had a lot of accolades to his credit during his time, the 3 or 4 years that he was with WWE, if that. But a pretty nice matchup. And the finish came, which I thought was the most interesting part about the match, was Ken Shamrock locking in the ankle lock on Mankind. Mankind would not tap out. And while he was locked into the ankle lock, Mankind applied the mandible claw on himself, forcing himself to pass out. And Ken Shamrock was ecstatic, like, I retained my title. Then after finding out that Mankind had cost himself the victory for whatever reason, he was so pissed. And then Mankind was walking away as the last man laughing. He got the last laugh. So that was pretty funny. I don't know why Mankind did that. I guess he probably just didn't want to pass out to the ankle lock, so he just passed out to his own move instead. So he beat himself. He wasn't beat by Ken Shamrock. So maybe that's the whole point of the matchup. I'm not really sure. But it was entertaining, though. I thought the finish, while bizarre, for lack of a better term, was interesting and innovative. Only for Mankind would you see something like that, so I enjoyed that. Mark Henry versus The Rock up next. Pretty solid matchup, former Nation of Domination buddies. This is right before Rock had kind of broken out as a single star. He already was a breakout single star by this point. A pretty good matchup for the most part. Mark Henry, it was cool to see him kind of featured in a prominent role right before the main event. And in the end, he would actually win the matchup. I was fully expecting a Rock victory here. But in the end, with some help of D'Lo Brown holding down the foot of The Rock at ringside, Mark Henry would pick up the victory, so kind of furthering their feud effectively with The Rock. The match itself was nothing noteworthy, nothing too special, but it was a good match. The result was pleasantly surprising and kind of put Mark Henry in the driver's seat for the remainder of their feud. So we get to the main event, a WWE Championship match between The Undertaker and Kane with Stone Cold Steve Austin as the special guest referee. So the story leading into this matchup, and any diehard Attitude Era fan will tell you what, will know what I'm talking about here, or will recall what I'm talking about, was when Stone Cold Steve Austin was pinned for the WWE title by both Undertaker and Kane. I don't remember if it was a handicap match or a triple threat, whatever. But the point of the matter was, or the fact of the matter was that Austin got pinned by both Kane and Undertaker, so Mr. McMahon declared the title vacant, and on this show, Undertaker and Kane would fight for the belt with Stone Cold Steve Austin as the special guest referee. So Mr. McMahon's rationale for making Austin the referee was that he had to, quote-unquote, humble himself by crowning the new champion as the referee. And if he did not make a 3 count, then he would be fired if no new champion was crowned. So it was all up to Austin. That was kind of the selling point on this matchup. It made that part entertaining. Undertaker and Kane having a pretty nice matchup for the most part, a typical Undertaker-Kane match. And then it just kind of got bizarre at the end for my taste. Like, I was confused. Maybe someone can elaborate and kind of make this clearer for me and make it less confusing. That, Austin was kind of doing a standard referee shtick. And then at the end, Undertaker and Kane would team up and take out Austin together. So there was no referee per se. Technically there's no referee. And then out comes Paul Bearer, who attacks Kane from behind with a steel chair. And before Kane could get his hands on Paul Bearer, Undertaker attacks Kane. So Paul Bearer and Undertaker working together to screw over Kane. Maybe it was a double cross. I have no idea. Maybe McMahon told them to take out Austin, and then Undertaker wanted to take out Kane himself so he could win the championship. I have no idea. So Undertaker is pinning Kane. Austin says, "Oh, no, you don't." And he lays out Undertaker with the steel chair, and he has both guys pin each other. Or no, he doesn't. I think he just has them lay there, and he makes the 3 count for both of them. And he just rules it a no contest. And he takes the mic and says, "And your new WWF champion, Stone Cold Steve Austin." Then he calls out McMahon. He goes to the back area, which was weird. That was kind of a waste of time. And everything after that matchup, after the matchup ended, I understand pay-per-view viewers probably wanted to see what was going to happen next, or find out why the main event was ruled a no contest, which would basically never happen in a pay-per-view main event, a pay-per-view that people are paying 40, 50, 60 bucks for, but whatever. The rest of this segment should have happened on Raw, but nevertheless, we had Austin go to the back area, kind of looking for him, kind of looking for Mr. McMahon, calling him out, and when he wouldn't find him, he went back to the ring, and all this happened within like 10 minutes or so. He called out McMahon, who was shown in some goalkeeper thing in some locked up, protected area above the stage, and he fired McMahon, or he fired Austin, kind of showing that he had balls, and he was saying, like, I have the brass to fire your ass, and Austin, screw you, you're fired. And the crowd was eating it all up. They were shitting all over McMahon. They were throwing their crap at McMahon. There was an opening above where he was sitting, so people were throwing in their food and their garbage and whatever. That was pretty funny. So he fires Austin, and that was kind of, I like that more than them going off the show with the no contest, because although it kind of makes you look forward to Raw to find out what's going to happen next, it's like, then why did I buy this pay-per-view if no new champion was crowned? So I would have felt screwed over if that was the case, no pun intended, with Austin being screwed over by Mr. McMahon. So I'm glad that didn't happen. The post-match segment, while it ran a little bit long, like 10 minutes, was kind of weird. That was kind of a weird time for it. And very rarely do you get a promo to close a pay-per-view. So the firing of Austin was more kind of the hook for the next night's Raw, and finding out what was next for Stone Cold Steve Austin and the WWE Championship. That was a nice hook, and they did that very effectively. So on the whole, I thought it was a good show. I didn't think it was bad. I didn't think it was great. I didn't enjoy it as much as I did the other Backlash shows. Even although I wasn't a fan, during the time of 98, 99, and 2000, whatever. I still enjoy going back and watching some Attitude Era stuff because a lot of it is very fun. My favorite era personally in wrestling is the Ruthless Aggression era, so I like watching pay-per-views from that time, and of course pay-per-views from like 08 and onward when I was a fan for. But especially pay-per-views from that era, from 02 to 05. The Attitude Era just never really did it for me. I always enjoy it, but I never see like the greatness of it. Like some of the off-the-cuff stuff, like the constant babyface and heel turns. I don't know, I'm more traditionalist in the sense, and it's probably just because I grew up in a different time period, a drastically different time period, that I just, don't... If there's any one pay-per-view that I want to watch, it's likely not going to be from the Attitude Era. Like all the WrestleManias from that time period were not really that good. Like some of my least favorite WrestleManias took place from 97 to 01, aside from WrestleMania 17, of course. All the other WrestleManias, 14, 15, and 16 were kind of meh, at best. But still, going back to what I was saying before in terms of Judgment Day in your house, 1998, a good show. I wouldn't suggest that you go out of your way to watch it. Probably hold off for another future Judgment Day event. It was a good show. You had some good matches. X-Pac and D'Lo Brown I enjoyed. Christian and Taka Michinoku. The main event, Undertaker and Kane, was just a big clusterfuck and a train wreck in all of the best of ways. The Attitude, what it's known for. Some other cool surprises along the way. Two new champions crowned, so it was a pretty noteworthy show. Aside from that, though, like I said, I would not strongly recommend that you need to go out of your way to watch this show. But it was fun for what it was. Coming in or clocking in around 2 hours and 45 minutes. You'll enjoy it. Nothing too special, but it was solid, to say the least. So that's going to wrap up my review of Judgment Day 1998. Make sure to come back on Sunday, tomorrow, for my review of Judgment Day 2000. There was no Judgment Day 1999, so I don't think I'm skipping over one. I think it was replaced by Over the Edge the year prior. And when it came back in 2000, it was only solely known as Judgment Day, not Judgment Day in your house. But if you want to watch the show on the network, it's under the Judgment Day section. It's not under in your house or whatever, just to kind of point that out. So I'll be back on Sunday with my review of Judgment Day 2000, which is going to be pretty fun. But in the meantime, and in between time, you can find me on Twitter at WrestleRant, on Facebook at facebook.com/graham.gsm.matthews. You can find me also on nextairwrestling.net, my written reviews of Raw, SmackDown, Impact Wrestling, Main Event, Superstars, NXT, Lucha Underground, and everything else in the world of wrestling, along with some great guest columns from time to time, only at nextairwrestling.net. And last but not least, make sure to share, subscribe, comment, and like this video. All support is greatly appreciated. I'll catch you guys tomorrow right here on WrestleRant for my review of Judgment Day 1999. Have a great Saturday, folks. I'll catch you then.